Hey, it's Chris here again, and I'm going to talk about immutable infrastructure, specifically using Vagrant. So immutable infrastructure is more of a concept than it is a technology. But let's have a quick overview of maybe what it is. So to explain immutable infrastructure a little bit, imagine that you have in production 3 machines. And most of the time they hum along nicely. But occasionally, one of them has a problem. Now you know that under normal circumstances, you've got to rush in as quick as you can and solve that problem. And if you don't solve it quickly, the problem is likely to get worse and worse. So that adds a lot of stress, perhaps a lot of downtime for that server. The beauty of an immutable infrastructure is instead of this scenario where we're trying to fix an ailing server, we say, here's a server with a problem. Let's just get rid of it and replace it with an exact replica instantly. So Vagrant allows the concept of immutable infrastructures. How would we go about doing that? Okay, so how would I accomplish this replaceability of my Vagrant machines? Well, let's start out by creating a new Vagrant box with MySQL in it. And I'm going to do a Vagrant init. And I'm going to use the CB Matthews MySQL flyway box to start with. As you recall from the very first video, this has got MySQL and flyway pre-installed in it. I'm just going to do a Vagrant up. Okay, so the machine is up. First I want to show you the immediate problem I have if I want to just toss this machine and restart it. So let's go into the machine and I'll connect to MySQL. Remember the username and password are root. So I'm in MySQL. I can create a database if I like. Let's say I've got a database of cars. Okay, so I'm using that database. That's fine. If I exit out of here, and let's say something went wrong with my machine, and I did a Vagrant destroy, because I want to replace it. The -F option is force. It just won't prompt me, are you sure, yes or no? I'm sure I want to destroy it. So the machine was destroyed. It is gone. If I try to bring it back, so as it's coming up, obviously if I bring this back, it's a brand new machine. The database that I just created isn't in there anymore, the CarDB. So if I want immutable infrastructure, if I want to be able to toss this machine at will and replace it with a fresh machine, then I need a way to keep the data out of the database itself. So the difference is you separate that which is valuable, that is the data, the database, with that which you don't really care too much if you replace it. So the server itself, if the server has health problems, I know that I can recreate one of these MySQL servers anytime I want with a new Vagrant up. So I want to separate the server itself from the data that's contained within it. So it's the server that's immutable. I don't want the server to have anything valuable or changeable inside of it. The data, of course, is mutable. I can change the data, the database, as much as I like. But it's the server that I don't care about. So I need to separate these somehow. So if I go into this again, of course this is a brand new machine. If I go into MySQL and I log in as root, I can try to use the CarDB. And of course it doesn't even, of course it would help if I spelled it right. Of course it doesn't even know what it is because this is a brand new machine, and that database would have been destroyed with the Vagrant destroy. So what do we do about this? So the principle is, for any box that you want to consider immutable, you need to find those pieces which you consider valuable, which you want to survive a destroy and a re-up, and you need to remove them from the machine itself. You need to externalize them from the machine. So for MySQL, if I just look around on the file system a little bit, if I go to var lib and I do a directory listing, there is a directory here called MySQL. Actually, it's owned by the MySQL user, and that's where the data is actually stored for this database. I can get into that directory if I'll just become root. So I just execute bash as the super user. And I can go into the MySQL directory. And so here you have, this is the actual content of the database. So this is what I'd like to preserve. Well, what I can do is I can actually copy this outside of my VM. So let's say I want to copy that directory. I'm going to place it, toss it down to the /vagrant directory on the VM. Now, if you remember, the vagrant directory on the VM maps to the actual project directory on the physical host. So actually, we can go see this in real time before I execute that command. If I go to dev, and it was so if I execute that command, we go and look over here. You'll notice I now have a MySQL subdirectory, and there's all that same data that I just copied. I copied it out to my physical host. So that's nice. But we need MySQL to actually use that data out on the physical host. So my thinking here is I got that data out on the physical host. I want MySQL to read the data off the physical host. So if I destroy the server and bring it back, the data continues to exist on the physical host, and I can mount it again. So let me just get out of root, and I'll get out of the VM. So there it is. It's on the physical host. Let's have a look at this in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so as before, we have the Vagrant file, and we know what the config VM box is all about. I'm not going to bother forwarding any ports, but I'm going to go and fiddle with the synced folder settings. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I basically want to mount the var lib MySQL directory out onto my physical host instead of within the VM. So the way this works is, on my physical host, I have a subdirectory called MySQL right outside the project directory. There it is, or I should say right inside the project directory. And I want to map that to something on the VM. So on the VM, we saw that var lib MySQL is the location that we want those database files to be. Now I can give this a name just so that we know what this synced folder is for. You notice that when we were on the VM, the MySQL directory was actually owned by the MySQL user and group. So we actually have the option to add those in the synced folder as well. So I can say owner is MySQL and the group is MySQL. Okay. I also can add, and we never covered this in the previous videos, but mount options. So this allows me to mount the folder with specific permissions. Okay, so let's just put these in. Dmode. This is the directory listing permissions. 775. So read, write, execute for the MySQL user. Read, write, execute for the MySQL group, and read, execute for everybody else. Okay, but no write. And then we can give a similar setting for the files within the directory, 664. We don't necessarily want to be able to execute those directories, but we do want to be able to read and write them. So that's what that will do. So I'll save that. And I'm going to do a vagrant reload. And what this will do is it will now mount it'll mount the MySQL directory. But actually, before I do that, let's go in here, and I'm just going to touch a file.txt on my physical host because I want to show you something. I'll do a Vagrant reload. Okay, so I had a little issue with that. That's easy to fix because I just forgot a colon. I'll do the Vagrant reload. And of course I forgot a comma as well. Okay, so we see the mounting happened, just as we expected, but I want to draw your attention to something, the order in which this stuff happened. The machine booted, and only after the machine was fully booted did we mount. So you can imagine what happens during boot is the MySQL service starts up. So when the MySQL service started up inside the VM, it was obviously pointing at the directory inside the VM because we hadn't mounted the host directory yet. So if I actually go into Vagrant SSH, if I connect if I create that database, I've sort of only changed this in memory because MySQL didn't know anything about the host mounted directory when it started up. So see, I'm using CAR's database, but what happens if I restart the MySQL service? So this time when the service comes up, it's going to go and read var lib MySQL, and this time it will bind to the actual MySQL directory on my host. So if I actually go and connect to MySQL again and I say I want to use cars DB, it'll be like, I don't know what that is. And the reason is because we changed the file system from underneath it. It didn't know that was there. But I do want to prove that we are mounted correctly. So if I go to var lib MySQL, you will see that a file.txt that I created is there. I'm going to remove it. So we have a little bit of a problem though. It's an ordering problem. When the machine came up, as it was coming up, the MySQL service started, but the MySQL service was still looking at its own MySQL file system inside the VM. That's all it could see at that point. It was only after the machine had fully come up that we changed the mounting, so to point to the physical host file system for MySQL. So there's a little bit of an order problem there, and there is a way to fix that. So remember, what was it that allowed us for MySQL to see the host file system? Well, we just restarted the MySQL service is all we did. We ran sudo service MySQL restart. And of course, MySQL reinitialized, it tried to mount varlib MySQL, and it happened to be that varlib MySQL was redirected onto the physical host. So really what we need to do is we need to ensure that after the mounting happens, that we restart MySQL. And it just so happens we can do that. We scroll up quite a ways to when this machine came up. You'll notice that I mounted the shared folders, and then right after that it would have done provisioning if any provisioners were set up. So provisioning runs after the file mounting. So what we can do is if we go into Visual Studio Code, and hopefully I'll type this one correctly, I'm going to add a new provisioner, config VM provision, and it'll be a shell provisioner, and we're going to run some inline code, and that's just going to be service MySQL restart. I don't have to say sudo because everything during the provision actually runs as the system user. as the root. Now, here's the secret. I want this to run always. Just as we saw in the provisioning video, I can make it so that this provisioner will always run. So every time this machine comes up, right after the mounting happens, I'll restart MySQL so that MySQL is aware of the files that exist on my host machine. So, if we do a Vagrant reload, so here we're mounting, and right after that I'm running my inline script, which does a restart on the MySQL server. So if I go into the box, now remember, I hadn't created anything at all in my host system MySQL database. So if I say MySQL user root, password root, and I try to use CarDB, of course it doesn't know. So let's create it. I'll put some table in there. Let's say create table car. It'll have an ID. Let's say make, model, and year. The primary key is the ID. Let's see. Looks okay. So we created the table. Let's insert a record. Make, model, year. We'll insert that thing. It's not cars, it's car. Okay. I'm gonna issue a commit for good measure. I don't think I actually need it on this. This is an auto commit table. So I've got something in there. I can see there is a record in there. Now, let's say this machine caught fire and I needed to get rid of it and replace it. So let's do a Vagrant destroy. So this machine will just disappear because we had an issue with it. I look in here, I still have my MySQL directory and the CarDB is in there. So we'll do a Vagrant up. This will of course create a brand new machine, but since we're going to mount the MySQL directory here in the project, when MySQL comes up after we do the restart in the provision, it should mount the host file system and I should have my database back the way it was. So rather than try to fight that fire, whatever the fire might have been with the original server, I just blow it away and create a new one. So the new machine was created and it's coming up. Okay, and we're mounting the folders. You'll see that the mounting happened for the MySQL folder and we're running the provisioner which will restart MySQL. So if I go into Vagrant, into the machine by SSH, and I connect, and I say use CarDB, it knows what that database is, and there's my data. So it survived the destroy and the recreation of this machine. So I kind of have the beginnings of an immutable infrastructure here. If part of my infrastructure was a database server, I could use this machine as my database server provided that I keep the data elsewhere. Now of course, hopefully I'm backing up the actual data somewhere as well, so that that isn't catastrophic as well if that disappears on me. So that's really interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up my Vagrant file, and I'm going to commit it to GitHub. I'll provide the link in the description below so that you can pull down this project. But just to review the steps, I created a brand new Vagrant machine using the CB Matthews MySQL Flyway base box. So I created that. I brought it up the first time, and what I did was I copied the contents of varlib MySQL out into my physical host. Okay, that was just to get the copy out there, the initial copy. Then what I did was I changed the Vagrant file so that I set up a synced folder that points varlib MySQL to the MySQL copy that I created, making sure the owner and the group is all correct, the mount options are all correct for that directory. And finally what I did was I added an always running provisioner that restarts the MySQL service when the machine comes up, right after the mounting happens. So that's what I did to make this machine immutable. As I said, immutability is not so much a technology, it's more of a concept. I followed certain principles so that this machine would survive a destroy and a recreation. And I believe you can do this with pretty well any kind of machine you need. Say you have an Nginx or an Apache web server, and you want to keep the contents, the contents of your website out of the server itself. Well, you can imagine mounting a folder out on your host machine that actually contains the contents of the website you want to host, and the server itself is disposable. You could destroy it and recreate it at any time. So I hope that this video was helpful, guys. If you find it interesting, always please subscribe or like these videos. Give me some comments. I'm open to constructive criticism always. Thanks for watching.